Testing.
I'll call this meeting of the school committee for the city of Lewiston, Maine to order for Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. Could you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will do introductions of the members of the school committee. We'll start with Ms. Scott.
Linda Scott, Lewiston City Council Representative.
Paul Beauplant, Ward 7 Representative.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5. Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Jake Langley, Superintendent.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Thank you, everyone. This meeting is a budget hearing. We will we'll start with the looking at several of the articles. Article 1 is regular instruction.
So tonight, a couple of different things procedurally. So you have copies of both the slideshow that I'll be sharing publicly on the screen, and also a memo regarding some reductions. As we discussed things on Monday, I feel like we came to a conclusion of, with the numbers we're looking at and the general climate financially from state reductions, that we needed to do some hard work. And so we've brought some things to you, and it's okay with the committee. I'd like to start with the reductions before we jump into the binder, as the binder represents where we started. So you may see some duplication there, and I wanted you to have a chance to see those reductions first. All right, so I'm going to jump into the memo. It's titled Fiscal Year 24 Budget Reductions. I try not to do this too much, but I'm going to read a little bit tonight. I think the language is incredibly important, and these reductions that we're sharing with you, they're hard. They're really, really hard. So we're faced with an unprecedented financial situation due to reduced funding from the state resources. Though the initial FY24 budget has been built conservatively, it still represents nearly an $8 million local increase. As mentioned in our initial presentation, costs are up significantly. Relief funds are sunsetting, and there are key items we need to add back in or include in our local budget. Carried this over from our initial memo on Monday, but projected health insurance increases are up 1.4 million. Overall salary increases 3.1 million. Again, those are contractual. Overall salary and benefit increase of $4.8 million. Remaining debt service for the voter-approved high school expansion is still on our books. Compliance costs from the Department of Justice and the Department of Labor, the work that we're doing has a cost to it. We continue to work to improve special education structure and its programming. Overall inflation, the cost of goods, which I think we're all feeling in our respective personal lives, and we're also seeing professionally in the cost of goods for schools. Returning classroom materials and supplies from federal emergency pandemic funds to the local budget. Because again, those funds that I often refer to as either COVID release or relief or ESSER. That's to the tune of $300,000. And again, as we mentioned last time, that's everything from, and I don't mean it to be facetious, but from toilet paper to textbooks. There's a cost of doing business with schools, and it's not a small one. We also have some things that we're trying to plug back in, not in totality. We had some things there last year as we tried to fold in 1%, and then this is the second fold back in. But our after school and summer programming is around $351,000. I believe our community and students have found great benefit to that, but it's at a cost. When you pair the reduced subsidy with the increased cost, something has to give. We cannot responsibly ask our community to raise 7.8 million plus more dollars in the tax base. Our approach is to offer immediate reductions as we go through the scheduled days of budget detail review, or as we call our binders when we work through those. Unfortunately, this is not a fine-tooth comb set of reductions. We're doing something that I've never seen in all of my years of education. I've never seen a budget look up and be $7.8 million short on day one. I've seen ads that get hard. I've seen contracts that make things challenging. I've never seen this. This isn't a go line by line and find little pieces, and we may, but that will not resolve the challenge we have before us. Reductions such as these do impair our ability to continuously improve teaching and learning, student outcomes, and weaken the structure of our schools. As you know, we've taken a transparent and realistic approach, and this dates back to September with administrators, and we met and said, if you want something new, tell me how you're paying for it by other reductions. That was the tone of the start of our budget, and it still landed us in a conservative way with this shortfall today. These cuts are direct and they are significant. Further reductions create risks as it relates to our efforts to improve instruction, our ability to provide necessary services legally and necessary, supervision and safety, and potential legal situations. So trying to build in a rationale beyond that, to identify the reductions that we're about to share, we worked with our district leadership and our school leadership, many of whom are here tonight. We've identified items through the lens of vacancies, some of them multi-year, which still feels like a need, but if you can't hire, it's time, something's got to give. Subsidy ratios established by the state of Maine, and I want to put a caveat on that. I don't necessarily agree with the ratios, but it is a guiding point. So one example, if they say there should be 17 students per one teacher in a ratio, it spits out a number for subsidy. I don't necessarily agree with the number or the ratio, given our demographic and level of need, but it's what the state uses. And so it became an anchoring point to review some things that are full of controversy. None of these are easy. We did some comparative work with things such as enrollments. And by comparative work, I mean, if there's two classrooms here of 8 and a classroom over there of 4, do we have enough room to collapse that? What does that look like? And so we did work around that. We also looked at school to school resources, and that's an impossible thing to do, but we were looking for, at least I was looking for ways to strike a balance between, if you're making a decision to recommend this to the committee, what does that mean? And one other benchmark you can look at is, well, what does another school have that might have comparative challenges? All our schools are different. And so it's hard to say the needs of, say, our Farwell might be the same as the needs of, say, Connors. And so we know that we have differing needs in different schools and obviously different populations, which has an impact. But it was, again, a metric that we tried to consider in these tough decisions. We broke these reductions out by budget areas. And we've identified nearly $3.5 million in reductions. And I want to emphasize that these are difficult. I shared with Council President Scott before the meeting began, just walking by, that about a third of these, realistically, because of multi-year vacancies, they weren't that hard. The other 2/3 were the secondary list that administrators shared. Please do not take this, but I get the situation. So we are beyond tier 1 into that tier of, these are These are bad scenarios potentially, but they understand and they're willing to sacrifice some things. So the total potential reduction is $3.466 million, $3,466,837. I want to walk you through some of these. And I also want to note that in communicating with our LEA, with our building leadership, and trying to be mindful with our community and our staff as a whole, we did message things out Monday that we knew this was going to be difficult, and we'll continue to try to communicate and stay in front of things. But some of this is impossible because we're talking about people. We're not just talking about positions. We may bring some things up in here that are not definite at this point, but a presentation to you of some potential shifts. But make no mistake, this represents people. And so I may dodge some questions because until we get to a place where we know that that's where we're at, I don't want to create a negative atmosphere amongst our staff. It'll be bad enough that they have to wonder, but I don't want to tell someone today, this might be you don't have a position. And I'm going to preface that before we go through the list with also all of these reductions, I believe, between vacancies, attrition, and future openings, we can find a spot for any staff that's on this list indirectly. I believe we can employ anyone that we reduce. So I'm going to work through these. Feel free to ask any questions as we go. Some of these I'll spend more time on than others, but I wanted you to have a sense that a number of these positions vacant for multiple years. So you see things like a gen ed, ed tech. So it's not a special ed position, but it's something that has either gone unfilled, or to be frank, we borrowed from that position to fill another position, like a classroom teacher or a full-time ed tech in a special ed classroom, those kinds of things. So that position has sat as something that we haven't been paying for day to day. 2 duty aides, those are positions that help us do multiple things: supervise a cafeteria, greet kids, move kids from place to place, help with some coverages. Excuse me, the first one was a one-to-one general ed tech. You can see situations like that where you see one-to-one, it's either, if it's gen ed, it's probably a 504. If it's non-gen ed, it's special ed, whenever you see a one-to-one. And so the work that we did, and sometimes we find things like we had a student with a 504 that they needed a one-to-one, but they graduated. And so we don't need to continue, or they're going to graduate this year, so we don't need to continue that position moving forward. Having said that, the student returns or a new student shows up, we have no position to navigate to help that student. That's the danger of these kinds of cuts. The next 2 you see on here are classroom teachers, and these are based on reductions. And actually, I talked to a principal late this afternoon about the detail of the grade 3 piece, and I'll avoid which school, but it's actually not grade 3. There's some transitions they have planned, but it is a teacher position at a school because of enrollments. And by enrollments, I don't mean taking 2 classes of 4, making a class of 8. I'm saying making 2 classes of 8, a 16, or a 10 and a 9, a 19. These average class sizes are pieces that we've looked at as we've made these decisions, and some of them go up significantly. Instructional equipment, this is regular ed instructional equipment, so some reductions there. Pre-K teacher and ed tech, again, around enrollment numbers. Quick reminder with pre-K, we don't always know the numbers. The pandemic has made it even harder to know the numbers, especially as students decide to come back to school sometimes mid-year. And so in some pre-K classes, we had numbers this year that made us start talking about, should we do full day pre-K? And right now I'm looking at our budget scenario and thinking, I don't know how we do that. If anything, we have to reduce. Full day pre-K would probably cause us to have to either modify some schedules or grow the number of pre-K teachers and ed techs we have. Certainly we're not in that scenario right now. ELL teacher, a music teacher, And the music teacher is a unique situation. We found someone to help and it's like a part-time thing. And if that continues to work, this could work. But these are the kinds of conversations we're having. We have a situation that's working today that if it changes everything. But again, it's here before us. World language teacher, expeditionary learning, staffing around that. Alternative school ed tech, which was a bit of a hangover back when the middle school had an ed tech program, and that piece has, the title has hung on, but it's unfilled. English language arts, multiple math teachers, blended math position, ELA teacher, blended English teacher, ELL instructional coach, that's also a part-time interventionist, some technology equipment, one-to-one 504 ed tech, labeled a little differently than the one we talked about earlier, but probably came from a different spot, but the same kinds of roles. Facilities improvement projects. This ranks rates everywhere from 4 tiles to painting a corridor to things that our schools should have as maintenance and upkeep. But we found some reductions there. Utilities and other project reductions. And what I mean by utilities is we're trying to feel out the percentage increase that we're all living at home. And so some utilities are not locked in and they have variables. And then we try to predict them. So one example is what's the cost of gas next year versus some of our small facilities that have a different fuel source. And then another one is we just repaired the controls at one of our elementary schools, and there's a projected savings because the controls are better. And we think that will be actualized. We budgeted in the middle, thinking if it's not actualized, it won't hurt us too bad. If it is actualized, we'd have a little savings there. So right now we're bringing you just with savings. If it's not actually realized or we have a terribly cold year, we have a challenge. In special education, 2 additional resource room positions, 9 RISE BHPs, a dozen one-to-one ed techs, 1-to-1 BHP, 2 FLS, a functional life skills BHP, and 10 resource room ed techs. We know the level of need that we have. Scott?
How many of these were unfilled positions already?
If I had to throw you a number, I'd say 90% of them are unfilled, but
Okay.
not all.
Okay.
Career and technical education. I want to point out that some of these are corrections. What happened is we were going through our budgets and working with Director Callahan, found some things that were in there twice. And so some of these are a little more specific to people, but just to reassure anybody watching who this might be, some of this is we try to get creative with how we pay for things. Some things we reduce, but like the teacher leader stipends, that remains. But what we found is it was entered twice accidentally. And so that comes out of your binder. And so those are reductions we can take right away. And there's other corrections that we have found, and I believe that we will find because we're looking so intently. The office of the principal or director supplies, found ways to reduce some things there. Culinary stipends, again, one of those duplicates. Some repairs at the ladle that they're going to try to hold off on. Some professional development costs, looking for creative ways to pay for that. Assessments for credentials. And so these are students taking a assessment in their respective programs to get industry certifications. Rob's going to try to find a way to get them paid for or work with community partners to help. But those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. EAD technology, I believe, is software around the engineering program. And so again, looking for ways to pay for that. Ms. Hurd?
Thank you. Professional development, does that include like teacher workshop days? Is that professional development that they have during the school day? Like what does that entail?
So it would be a range of things at the Technical Center. So it's everything from industry specific to potentially having things on those workshop days. And Rob, I don't know if you want to chime in on additional detail around the professional development costs or potential reductions there. Okay, so I just want to repeat what Rob said because he's on the side here, that they were awarded a grant that will help in part pay for some of that professional development. So, and again, those grant awards come in throughout the process and will continue to adjust. Go ahead.
This professional development, is that contractual?
I don't think this is the kind of professional development time as being contractual. It'd probably be more specific to one of the industry or trade positions. So I want to repeat for the audience who may not hear that. The grant was connected to leadership and part of what this whole committee's been passionate about, trying to find the connection between what are students demonstrating that they know and they're able to do in their technology classes or their career and tech classes, and how might that help backfill in part or in full high school credits. And so the work that they're doing through that grant is to have someone come in and start to pull out or teach staff how to pull out those academic related standards from their existing curriculum. Under student staff support, we have some office staff clerk positions. Principal clerk 1, which is connected to one of our libraries. Store next door restructuring, it's a conversation that's happened. I don't know if this expedites it or not, but we have talked about the supports we provide to the store next door and the amazing supports they provide students. But when we're talking about teachers and direct supports in classrooms, is it time to have a conversation about restructuring that with some less cost to LPS, trying to maintain it, and maybe more cost for the nonprofit. Med tech position, which is actually connected to the nurses and not, which can sometimes be confused as a med tech who is an adult that works with a student who has a medical need. So this is connected to additional nurse staff. Not a nurse, but a kind of an assistant too. In administration, we, again, looking at the different resources that are in some buildings that are not in others. And this is about the assistant principal. There's some real challenges to even saying this out loud. I think that our entire administrative team works incredibly hard every single day. I would encourage you to shadow them for a day. You might be surprised what they do. Same with our teachers and other staff. But trying to look at the resources that some have that others don't, well, I think they would all take more if it was affordable. This was a hard one to put on the list, but I think that when we look at overall expenditures and reductions and trying to go back to those metrics of some level of parity in resources by building, not to minimize the work that our folks do. This was a hard one to share, but I think it's a responsible thing to do, trying to use some metrics to solve a almost $8 million challenge. It's almost an impossible ask, but it's on here. There's also the last one here is to reduce 2 principal clerk positions. I'll say out loud, those are connected to the high school, but they were added in duplication and error, so they stay whole. There's no reduction to the staff in the front office at the high school. And sometimes the duplication and entry happens because we have projection software called Munis that will take today's person and put their salary pieces in, because we upload the spreadsheets for that. And sometimes things get duplicated, or where I stopped and someone picked up, there's some overlay. So we go through our budgets and we look for those increases and those additions, and we spot some at times. There'll be others that I point out as we go through the binder that we have found that are not on this list, but will be net reductions in the long run. Ms. Hurd?
Thank you. Can you, just for a second, go back to assessment of, for credentials? And just explain that to me a little. I don't have a, even close to a high schooler or, so for
Sure.
me to like understand that whole process would be great.
Yeah, I can give a couple examples, and if Director Callahan wants to chime in, he certainly can. There's a lot of credentials that are earned at the technical center. Some of the, let's say, lower level, but important in the industry is like an OSHA card. And so we have people assist with OSHA training, and that's just job safety. But when students complete the piece, I think much of the student body, if not all, get an OSHA 10 card, which is kind of an industry entry minimum. But it gives our kids a leg up when they apply for a job because they've had that training. There are other credentials like AC certified for automotive. So you can actually walk into an automotive shop and be a technician with levels of experience and proven credentials. They actually test for these. State inspection for vehicles. The tech center doesn't do that at this point, but students actually pass state inspection and they carry with them the licensed responsibility and capability to be hired by someone to do state inspections day one. So it's those kinds of things. I know there's lots and lots more, but just want to give you a sense of that. It's about work readiness.
So we're talking about potentially, so I'm assuming LPS pays for like the test or the whatever the fee is. So we're potentially talking about not covering the fee for those types of things anymore.
I think I would frame it as Director Callahan was going to try to find a way to make that happen. And just knowing him and the way he goes about the work, if there's a student that wants to take the test, he will find a way. But we've been budgeting for that and been using that. And so a student who might feel like, geez, I'm really on the bubble, maybe lacking confidence, Director Callahan and his staff can nudge that student to say, I think you got it, and take it. You can do it. And some of those students, they're successful. In this model, that might happen less often. And well, knowing him, he's still going to push kids and find a way. But I don't think we're going to take away the opportunity. I just think that we have to get creative.
Yeah, I have full trust in his capability to make that happen. That's just very concerning to me because we have students who maybe are not on that 4-year college plan track. And so this is a huge, could be detrimental to their career. So if we can't offer that, I mean, at that point, what's the point of having an LRTC program?
Yeah, if you want to, there is a mic up there available if you'd like to use it.
Thank you for the question. I mean, a couple of things. First, that these certifications and credentials are in many cases required by law. So we are not backing away from any of them. In fact, we're looking to expand wherever we can to make sure that students have credentials of value when they approach the workplace. What we have been able to do this year, and I'll give you one example, is that last summer I was certified as an OSHA instructor so that I can now award OSHA 10 cards, as can Mr. Gagnon, our assistant director. So that greatly diminishes the need. It's about $30 or $40 a card without a certified trainer in the building. This diminishes our request because we don't have to go off site or bring someone else from the outside in order to do that. So that's an example of a way we were able to sort of reduce the request without diminishing the program.
So jumping down the bottom, and I scrolled the screen there. The total potential staffing reductions that Lee shared with you this evening are $3.1+ million. And other item reductions over $300,000. So in total, as I said, when I began this memo, $3,466,837 in potential reductions here. And just want to read this next little excerpt that So please note that we anticipate turnover and other availability over the cycle of this school year and into next, so that positions reduce would have someone currently in the role would likely maintain their employment with us. We would work to find other opportunities within the district for those impacted. I want to emphasize likely. The further we reduce, which we did last year by a number of positions, that likely diminishes. I don't know how to emphasize enough that we've gone about this budget process differently because of the situation. In years past, we talk about budget lines and why is that up, 10%? And I don't know if I can support that. And why is this up this much? And is that a new position? Well, I don't think we're going to pay for that. And we have these conversations. This is a very different approach because the problem is very different. This $3.4 million is nothing like I've ever seen before in my entire career, before being a superintendent. These cuts, they hurt.
Mr. Superintendent, that the original proposal was about $7.8 million ask. So this would still leave us 4.4 above and beyond where we were last year.
That's correct. So I'm going to slide to our binders and I'll put the slideshow up so that folks can see what we're talking about. And I'll just start with kind of a binder introduction so people know what's out there. And sure. Yeah,
Ms.
go ahead.
Whitlow?
Thank you. So I know that in the memo, there's projected health insurance increases of 1.4 million. When do we get the actuals? And usually we over budget, under budget. Yeah, over budget. But I know like with COVID and everything and insurance rates are definitely going up. Did we still leave a little buffer there possibly?
Yeah, so what we did is we shared, we budgeted 12%. I think once upon a time, insurance came back at 14%. That was years ago. Last year, the percentage increase was under 1%, I believe. Is that correct, Adam? Under 1%. And the 2 years prior was 0%. I do think, as you mentioned, that was that COVID effect. People weren't going out and doing much. People were no longer having their screenings and testings because hospitals were not doing that. People were not getting hurt because they weren't, out doing certain things. But I also think people were not opting for certain procedures that might have found other things and whatnot. So what we're seeing now is people are kind of more active and back at regular life, which means there's more, broken bones. People are going back to their age appropriate and condition appropriate screenings to see kind of what's up. And that's I think in a good way, allowing them to find things that they can try to get healthy about. I don't have a good sense of what insurance might do this year. But March 27th is a date that's absolutely sticking in my mind as the date that we think we'll know more. Sometimes we hear a little more before that, or we can do some light factoring if they release some information about like how much we've spent and what our loss was. I don't know if you remember, but a couple years ago, early in the process, we took about half of that and said, I don't think it's going to be up this year because we were kind of hearing things. And that ended up working out okay, and we could reduce further. I'm not comfortable with that this year because it's been 0, less than 1%. And I'm not trying to speak poorly about any part of the industry, but I don't know how inflation goes up, and people are getting back to regular life, and to expect insurance to not make some kind of jump this year.
So what you're saying is that if it comes in that it's less than 12%, we'll see some additional funds there that we might hopefully be able to use somewhere else.
Yes, you're making a spot on point. Anything less than 12% is the school committee typically says immediately reduce, or they'll start looking at the things that we've already said this is just where we're at. And what might we do, whether it's a contingency, which is something I may bring up further in the conversation. We've been able to bring things to you, situations to you over the past year or two and say, we have this situation, we'd like your approval to do this. And we've had the money. Two examples, we better resourced Root Ed this year when that got up and running using unexpended funds. Not new in the budget per se, but unexpended funds. We also allocated 4 additional positions to the store next door, again, to try to get more students back into school and have access. But those were not budgeted items, those were unspent funds. The more reductions like this we do, the less capacity we have to do any of that. Because there's no funds. So we talked about the reductions already, so I'm going to pass that slide and just go right to our binders. On the first tab here, we have, or before the first tab, we have our table of contents. In tab 1, we have the budget memo, which was shared with you at our last meeting. And there's the detail there. The tab 2 is just a listing of our timeline, so scheduled meetings and what have you, and what things we intend to do in those meetings. And that's subject to change. You have discretion there if you want to move something up, move something back, put something in between. That can certainly be adjusted. If we do any of that, I do like to share it out publicly so people are aware of shifts. Tab 3, we have the ED 279, which we have discussed and talked about. Every day I look at it again to see if I missed something, I'm telling you, but we are exploring a difference of what we have in our records of 23 students. I know we have over 5,300, but 23 student difference in the state reporting on the EPS than we have in our records. We're exploring that. Every penny counts. And so we're looking at all those ratios and that data to make sure it's accurate. But in sum, that formulation, just want to point out again, for those who haven't been following until just now, when you look at our bottom line, it looks like there's about a $900,000 reduction, but I also want to note that there's other areas where funding increased, like career and technical education by over $400,000 that we cannot use for regular ed or special ed or anything like that. So from our perspective, when you look at that bottom line, that 430 also comes off because we can't use it for education in that sense. So again, I shared at a minimum, it's 1.3. I have found other nuances where I think it's actually closer to $1.7 million shortfall. But to build that context in this budget and the reductions we just talked about, when you talk, whether it's 1.3 or 1.7, less state dollars than last year or in the current year, that's the hole you start from. And when every contract gets a step and percentage raise and there's change in healthcare costs and the departments, the school departments cost around healthcare, building insurance, you name it, cost of goods, inflation, it adds up in a hurry. We have the article descriptions in tab 4. These are the headings that we follow. And again, structurally, we didn't make these up. These are expected by the state for accounting purposes. So we get all our codes and all of our descriptors and alignment in our budgetary process and accounting process by way of these article descriptors. So when we say Article 1 regular ed, you can see that there's a descriptor there, but this is in essence non-CTE, non-special ed, non-administration, and each of those other areas have their own category, and there are 11 of them. Next up, you see the revenue budget, and I'm going to kind of stand it up for a minute, just make sure that you have a sense of this. So revenue is just all about the money coming in. And so the big challenge that we have is what money's coming in and ensuring that it matches the money we intend to expend that you all approve. And so it's kind of a short route, but if you look at this grade column, that would be this budget proposal. And so if you follow the columns across, you can see what the subsidy is, and it talks about the state, and then it talks about local, some other things like fund balance, and you get into revenue for adult ed, because again, that has its own subsidy. And then some grand total things. And when you get down to the bottom and you see 105,808, that's the amount in the binder budget that you have before you. It does not include the reductions we just shared. And it doesn't include some corrections that we've already been finding along the way, but we'll share those with you as we go. Tab 6 is general fund article totals. So if you think of those article listings, so if you want to know what the totals were for regular instruction, it breaks it down by that one article only. The next tab, tab 7, is the general fund detail report. That's where we do the line by line stuff. We can see those percentage changes and look for making sure we understand why that percentage change is there. This is the kind of work that we do before these meetings to say, okay, we're reviewing these articles. What are these changes? So we can share them with you to ensure we're all on the same page. And we sometimes find, again, those duplicate entries, things like that. Tab 9 is adult education. We'll talk more about that as a specific item. And then tab 10 is general fund by object code. Just so we're all kind of learning together. If you go to tab 10, they give you an example. So the very first one on line 8. So if you want to say, okay, what are the salaries for teachers and guidance and those folks? And you can go straight across, and we've already shared this number with you, but those salaries are up $1.8 million just contractually. So if you're curious about a particular pocket, sometimes these can help you navigate a bigger grouping that is going to be separated in the detail by school or separated in the other tab by article. If that's helpful. And the nice thing about the 3 tabs is good reference. The bad thing about the way the system spits out reports is it's hard to go, well, I want to know what teachers make at blank school who are on their 5th year of their contract. We can go dig and compile that, but it doesn't just give us that. We have to build those kinds of reports. But if you have those kinds of inquiries, please let us know. We're happy to go find them for you. I also want to note that the binder's a little thinner this year. We went with a little smaller font and we went front to back. So there's a little less paper use. I guess we're trying to save everywhere we can. There is a couple of tabs in the back should you want to add other things. Go from there. Questions before we move on? Okay. So for tonight, as Mr. Damon shared, looking at Article 1, regular instruction first. What I'd like to do, but I'm open to other direction, is to start in tab 7. I think 7 gives us a fair amount of detail from an article perspective. And after 1, we'll do 4, 5, 7, and 11. And I just want to share highlights. I'll use the slides to do that. So in Article 1, you see this is going to be recurring, and I don't mean to be super monotone. I'm sorry that I already am, but you're going to see contractual increases in insurance costs on just about every slide we share you, because in every article, there's some level of people, and you'll see those costs there. So if you're in tab 7 right now, you can see on the left-hand side, every line is numbered. That helps us with reference points, especially if you're home later and you say, I want to know more about line 163, which I'm actually going to talk about, but because you see an increase or you see a decrease, or that number is the same in a negative, but it's a positive somewhere else. Are they connected? You'll have those kinds of questions, and the line numbers help us navigate and making sure we're talking about the same thing. Yes, and Adam put page numbers to it to make it easier to follow. So the other thing we have in here, again, more of the obvious inflation. but also some Easter items that are returned to the local budget, which is the only place they can go as those funds sunset. And so as we look at this, even, so I take lots and lots of notes in here, but like that top section where you see percentage increases on the right-hand side, you see 17, 13, 14, 13, 10, and 13. So as we look at items like that, I sit with Karen, Sue, Adam, Bill, and we go into our computers in the system and we say, what is that? Why is that different? And so what we have, and that is a difference in where stipends are located, because we used to charge them to specific lines, and now they have returned to where they belong with the people who get them. So that's a correction. So in another spot, you'll see a reduction in things, and that will help move some things. If you slide down to line 15, you see that 149,535 reduction. That money didn't go away. That's contractually stipended funds for people in those roles, but now it's under their salary line. So if I were an ELL teacher, my budgeted stipend doesn't exist in a bulk item like that. It exists under my name. And that's really for business office and payroll purposes. Yeah.
When you say stipend, are you talking stipends? Like contractual stipends in the contracts?
Yeah, so these ones are more the 3,000 additional dollars that our ELL staff get. Some other things that stood out to me, line 19, under gifted and talented, you can see a $35,000 or 19.3% increase. That's for transportation connected to that programming. Didn't have that for a while because of COVID, and we're looking to put that back in from places like ESA or what have you. See some other things like line 28, which says target EPS K2 Montel, which is Montello. Some of those big changes can actually just be staff changes. And so if you have someone that's a first-year teacher in the budget last year, and then you hire someone who is an experienced teacher who's higher on the scale, or they took insurance and benefits, or both, you can see large changes like that. But like, for instance, that's one that I identified as a large shift, and I wanted to understand what that was, and that was a staff change. So from again, article summary perspective, those are the things that stood out to me in Article 1. If you go into the detail, you can see more detail on Article 1, if you wish. Yeah, go ahead.
So talking about those like high percentages for change on page 2, a lot of the oh, sorry, I'm skipping ahead.
It's okay. Go ahead and ask. I think it's fine.
Those high percentages, I was just going to ask, in that article, are those, because we talked about staffing and stuff, are the like special ed assistant, is that what we're calling them, the assistant principal positions, those new ones, are those positions included in this, or is that a completely, because they're like,
Yeah, good
are
question.
they under like admin, or are they under, like, what are they under?
No, it's a good question. So the rules vary by article, but the specific positions you're talking about, much of it ends up on the bottom of page 2 under special ed. So when you look at line 54 and you see a 258% increase, I also want to make note of, when you see percentage increases, if the item itself is not that big, a percentage increase can look massive, but it's really not that much. Whereas a large budget line like LHS instructional supplies is going to be huge. So they could actually add twice as much, and it looks tiny percent wise, but it's a big number. So I like to look at both, but when you see that number shift, that is actually a shift in the cost of the administrative cost, but it also includes not just the APs, but you'll have spots where it also includes the special ed clerk that works with the AP to facilitate the meetings and the paperwork and what have you. So when you pair those both together, that would make up that kind of increase. But yes, that's what those particular ones are. We will talk about special ed. I don't think it's tonight. I think it's Monday, but really, I'm open to any questions that pop up for you. So feel free to ask.
On the first page, back to the first page, target EPS K through 2 Connors and Montello. Just what exactly does that mean? What is that position?
So we had it noted as a staff change, and so those are, I can, unless we can find out with specific detail. They're regular classroom teachers. I think the language around targeted, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but those are folks that are they're working specific EPS interventions and or because of class sizes.
Yeah, and most likely when those people or whoever was first in that position was hired, it was to reduce class size and that coding.
So years ago when we had, actually, you may have been chair at the time, Linda, excuse me, Ms. Scott. When we had huge numbers in, I don't know if it was second grade or kinder, but we were like hiring in a frenzy because the numbers got so big so quickly. And so what happened was with that group of students, those positions carried with that bubble of kids. I don't know if you remember the bubble conversation. So those positions, when they were created, followed with that bubble. And because it was attached to a person and they stayed on, that's how it's coded. And so that's what that looks like. And so the targeted piece is really around that. The EPS thing threw me off, but it's about class size reduction, which we have policy that guides some of class size approaches, but there's state law that governs specifically kindergarten, but that was that bubble that moved through. If that's it for now, and again, we can always come back. I know you're just getting your binders. We can start every meeting or close every meeting with other questions that you may have or come up, and you're always welcome to email and ask, and we can get you answers. The next article we had for tonight was Article 4, which is other instruction. And Article 4 actually starts on page 5, about halfway down page 5, line 118. A big one here that stands out is the extended school year Montello, school day, school year. That's that programming we're bringing back in from ESER. So that is your programs after school. That is your in places to match our requirement connected to the 21st century, things of that nature. Things we've used other funds to pay for to save dollars locally the last couple of years. That is sunsetting.
I thought on your list there was a cutting back of those programs. So is that a separate subset of programs?
So in the top part of the memo, I did mention the things we were trying to put back, and the extended school day and school year pieces were part of it. In the reductions, we did not pull from that particular area. Yeah, and that's an area that's it's challenging. If we pull funds from there because we transport kids, some of the programs provide nutrition, enrichment activities, need supplies, staffing, all those things. If I flip to page 6, there's a few things I made particular note of. Line 147, the co-curricular high school piece, those are stipend roles for like clubs and activities. The another line that was up, dues and fees. If you look further down, sorry, that's connected to. So our theater program has like first act or act 1. Am I saying that wrong? John. One X, I apologize. But all of those programs, so when you perform a play, there's copyrights to that play. And so you buy script and you pay for rights to use the productions. Again, a wonderful opportunity. I would not want to take away from our kids and our new expansion that has a fantastic theater teacher right now. It's really starting to get some energy behind it. But again, you see increases there. And also, again, from my slide, you see contractual increases, insurance costs, again, kind of repetitive. And then also stipends, dues, fees, and travel associated with those costs. And all of our transportation costs for after-school activities are not part of our contract with Hudson, just so you know. So there are some rates out there, and if they don't have a ride and we have to go with a different arrangement, we pay for those as we schedule them and take those rides.
So just a couple of questions, because this binder is online for community to look at. Right?
Yeah, Adam thought we'd be up tomorrow or the next day, that because we found some corrections today I wanted to make before we put them up.
So I'm wondering if we could do somewhere a little list of what some of these acronyms mean, so people understand what does ESD mean, what does ESY mean, you know what I mean? There's some things we may know what those things mean, but somebody in the general public that's looking at this may not understand what that particular position means.
Yep.
Also, I was wondering if we could, is there a list somewhere that says specifically which one of these in the other instructions that were return of extended offerings from ESSER? What exactly, is there a place to look for that specifically so we know exactly what was on that funding and what is being put back or what we're taking back on from that funding grandfathering?
So that's not on this list, but we can get that for you. What things we plugged back into the budget. It wouldn't be in this document, but we can provide something separate of. So those are the notes that I had Article 4. I don't know if you have questions. Again, I know you just got your binders today, but we can answer any other questions you have down the road. The next article is Article 5, which happens to be the next article. And again, at points of emphasis, we put on the slide contractual increases, insurance costs. There's been a movement of some positions for student services, and I want to provide you an example of that. So if you look at line 162, you see guidance for next step. And then if you look at line 174, so 162 and 174. So you see a reduction of 65 and then an addition of 75. What happened with that role is we hired someone, but we changed a bit of the role to be more of a community liaison. And just where they got hired because of their experience. So you're seeing kind of two things. Person is not a school counselor, but they're working in a capacity that's like that, but also as a community liaison with our students to families. And just the difference in pay is just where they landed in the contract. So it's a hire, but it's also a shift in what we think is a better role that benefits the need of our students there.
Mr. Bopalon.
Yeah, Jake, how many students are in next step that the community liaison would serve?
As of today, 91.
And what is the counselor student role for Lewiston High School ratio rather?
I can get that number for you. I don't know offhand, but I can have the math done, although I was gonna say our student service, about 310 students per school counselor at the high school.
Ms. Whitlow.
On line 156, guidance for Connors. Are we eliminating a position?
So I have a note on that. In part, what happened is school council has been so hard to hire this year that we actually hired someone with a kind of more creative title. And that landed in ESER. So I actually have a note in here to make a correction there that Connors needs to have 2 counselors. So with that's actually something that's going to be creative. Well, it'll be flat to last year essentially, but it's a putback that we found.
Thank you. Lines 178 to 182, 84, staff training, like just kind of like across the board, it looks like it's been reduced.
Yep.
Is that like professional development? Is that teacher work? Like, what is that?
Yep. So we have staff who are national board certified and they receive a stipend. They have in years past, but also in contract and also some funds from the state. In past years that had been coded to this line as a place to put that number. And again, this is where we're putting things back attached to the individual salary line, where it makes more sense accounting wise. And so all of those reductions are in and around the amount of money that folks were getting for their stipend. I don't want to dive into the weeds, but part of the challenge of like that and moving that is it belongs in a salary line because it has taxes and unemployment and all of those different metrics that you see in your pay stub. And so finding it in that line versus a salary line it's appropriate to move it to the salary. And so if I were that person, it would show up when we do an inquiry in our system for Jake, it would show me and the stipends that I receive instead of me and then checking a list of people who get stipends and then looking in Article 5 and it's better accounting. Yeah. Adam or Bill, do you want to add to that at all, or as far as that stipend line? Okay. I have another note further down. So on page 8, line 200, this is a positive, is a negative $109,922. And that is from our Chromebook debt service being paid off. So it's good to pay the bills and pay them off also. And those are the adjustments that stood out to me anyway, other than contractual increases and insurance costs. Yeah, go ahead.
Can we go back to line 163?
Sure can.
So that's a rooted position.
That is for 4 root ed positions.
Okay.
And projected benefits.
Okay.
Yes, so that is, you're not gonna hear me say this very often. That's new, and that's something that I believe in strongly, but I also feel that the committee, we've seen some good results come out of that effort, and so would like to continue to support students that are attending there.
If I could ask, how many students do we have in root ed right now? Do we have a number on that?
I'm looking for Cassidy, huh? Okay. Rachel's telling me about 25 students that are currently there.
Did she say that through K through 12 are in root ed? Oh, I didn't realize that. That's great. Okay.
Thank you. Can you just give an overview 187 to 193, the library, why 5 of the 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 of the 7 have gone up and 1 has gone down?
Yeah, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to look at Adam and Bill. But my take on those would be that they are contractual increases. And then if you have someone who's more veteran, step away from the role, and have someone come in that's less veteran. That's just a cost differential in their salary and benefits. But I see Bill nodding, he's double checking.
I believe that's it.
Okay, so they agree with me for now, but they fact checked me and that's a good thing. So he'll shout it out when we have that.
I know the size of the schools would probably need it, but are there multiple librarians at each school?
So we, at the elementary level, run, it's really an ed tech model where we have a head librarian and then we have ed techs that help facilitate the library services. We do have some librarians, but large in part, it's I would dare say it's already in an area that is underfunded for its potential benefits prior to some potential reductions. So again, the positive is we paid off our Chromebooks, at least that batch. Gotta, in these times, I just look for those bright spots, you know? So Article 7, which is actually down on page 9, about a third of the way down. And the makeup of this is your school admin and your, like, the senior principal clerks, and those folks are all in there also. And what we saw in that when we did our more detailed look was salaries and insurance costs. I should note, I mentioned earlier, but I wanted to say that there is a line here that's up a bit for high school. You see line 220. That's where those two additional principal clerks were entered accidentally. And so they're still whole. I want to emphasize that, but there would be two positions coming out of that budget line that were accidentally entered. The increase is reflected here, but that will be reduced when we go pull them out. Yeah. Article 11 is one that we look at pretty briefly every year. And it's the crossing guard fee, and the history behind that that I try to share with everyone is that for different regulatory reasons, we cannot employ a lifeguard, excuse me, a crossing guard, a crossing guard. And so the city has a framework, and then we're invoiced for that service. And it's regulatory, but it's been working. The rate hasn't changed in some time. So that's Article 11. And Adam said my facts check out, member Bopel with that one reduction, that library piece was around a staffing change.
Jake, on Article 11, how many crossing guards do we actually have?
So there's a number of crossing guards in our community. Some are more volunteer basis, but not quite, because that's another regulatory piece. I don't know how many we actually have. They may be able to dig up an invoice to see how many crossing guards were invoiced for. Yeah, so we'll have to check. I'm not sure.
It's not necessarily one or two for each elementary school per se.
I really, yeah, I want to give you an accurate answer. I'm not
Like
sure.
an awful small amount, but
I know that in years past, we had people volunteer, and I know that created a problem because it's not an allowable piece because of liability. And so some of this cost is, I think, really people doing things out of the graces of their heart to keep the kids safe, and they only take it kind of because they have to. But Adam can get us a number. If not now, then. Oh, 4 crossing guards at this point.
Can we take a 2-minute break? Thank you. I have to go back.
So I had us lined up for a break and really just a discussion time with a note that on Monday, we're looking at Articles 6, 8, 9, and 10. We also have a number of administrators here. I don't know if they wanted to add to anything, but yeah. So the last segment I had planned for tonight was really to just give you a chance to flip through some things, ask any questions you may have, or things maybe from last time or the reductions that came into your mind that you want more information about, so we can do some research for you if you need.
Thank you. I'm most concerned about summer school and after school. And I just want to make a mark on that and sort of, I would really like to hear much more about whatever reductions must happen. Like I want to push back as much as possible on those.
So I can speak to it a little bit. What you see in the budget in your binder is a reflection of what the district's contribution to the 21st century grants for the schools that have those grants. So every school in the district except for Montello has a 21st century grant. And we've always had an obligation to contribute a percentage or an amount to that. So what you see in the budget this year, that is restored from last year or the year before is that percentage. And then what the amount is for Montello is actually restoring what they need to run their program without the 21st century grant, which includes a person to coordinate that, so that it includes a salary of a person. So it is not we have not restored summer school and after school to the previous 2 years ago, the amounts that we had 2 years ago, which included additional funds to support some additional programming above and beyond 21st century. Those programs are still currently happening and will happen this summer, but we'll be using ESSER funds this year and potentially if we decide to do it next year as well with ESSER, the remaining ESSER funds. So this coming summer and then the following summer. So we have 2 summers left that we can use ESSER funds. And then it's done. So that's what you see. It is an increase, but it is an increase from last year, but it's just an increase to cover what our contribution is for 21st century.
So I was concerned about the reductions, not the increase, not the replacement. So after school and summer programming is listed as one of the, am I misunderstanding that?
That top portion is a cost. That top portion represents
Yeah.
different cost drivers.
Right?
And the reductions on page 2. So
Okay.
we didn't actually,
So it's not actually being
we
cut.
did not make reductions to that
Okay.
at this time. We
Okay,
were,
thank
we-
you. I misunderstood
Yep,
that.
no, we know there's a lot of interest in keeping those after school and summer programs, so we're trying to hold on to them.
Thank you. So this might be like a Bruce question too, but I spoke briefly with member Scott about looking into some of our contracts when it comes to like facility supplies and stuff like that. I'm not sure who we do like W. Mason, Staples, Portland Paper, whatnot. But is there a way, like, do those processes go out to bid, or can one of those companies just come to us and say like, hey, I want to meet, let's chat about pricing? Like, how does that work? Can we maybe also potentially like cut out that middle person? So like Staples or WB Mason go directly to Kimberly Clark or George Pacific or somebody like that. Like, how does that whole process work? And can we be doing that across the board, with different things, maybe not just like office supplies and like facilities, but like other vendors that we use and like stuff like that?
Well, actually, we are talking to several different alternate vendors on a couple of major projects that we're looking at. Facilities is actively trying to address some of those issues. As far as the supply chain stuff, I guess, Bill, I don't know if that's shopped or if that's.
You can kind of shop and promote. See the best price. Paper is a big one where we're watching what the costs are, and then if you get information about paper being, purchase.
So just because there's no mic over there, I just want to repeat what Bill said. We do shop around for different vendors, for different supplies. I know that from like a federal procurement place, we actually get quotes from multiple vendors. By rule, we have to. And so I know we use some of all of those vendors, but not exclusively any of the ones that you mentioned. I think that we try to branch out. We also have some consolidated efforts where we purchase things like our milk with area districts so that helps save us money as a cost center. So not that we couldn't hear more ideas about directly from distributors or things like that to save more money.
Paul?
I'd like, geez, the word doesn't really congratulate, but I'd like to recognize, Jake, the work that you and the team have done to come up with a budget that I hope will play in Peoria. So for that reason, when we're talking about a multi-million-dollar budget, I'm hesitating even to bring this up because it's chump change, but I'd really like to know for the future, the exact job responsibilities of the Next Step outreach counselor. I'm not saying that it's not needed, it's not a good job, but when you look at the student to teacher ratio at Lewiston High School, 4-1, then we all know that guidance counselors are doing more than getting little Jojo into Brown University. They're dealing with crises, they're dealing with IEPs. They're not seeing as many students as they need to. I'm just wondering if we can possibly consider a halftime. I realize there's no ideal. I realize Next Step has needs, regular Lewiston students, Next Step students have needs that Lewiston High School students may not have or may be able to deal with differently, but the ratio just blew me away. Thank you.
Yeah, I think everything's worth a look, right? And so what I'd like to do is reach out to Philip and ask him if he could share maybe a little more about what that person does day to day and have a better sense of it. But I think there's no item we can't look further into to see if that's the best use of dollars.
Linda?
Thank you. So a couple of things. So this is quite different than the way we've done budgets in the past. This is, and I just want to ask if there's a possibility. I know that in the past, there may not be administrators coming up and asking us for specific things this year because we've got a different scenario we're dealing with this year. Something that I too, in 11 years, have not seen. This is going to be a challenge, that's for sure. But I really think that it's really important when we hear from those administrators, because not only did they talk to us about their ask, they talked to us about their schools. And then we had this overview at the time of budget season for the community and ourselves to hear about the schools, to hear about the number of students in the schools, to hear about all of those different things. And so I'm wondering if we're going to have the opportunity for that, because we got our book, but we kind of jumped right into an article, right? And it wasn't the way we generally have a presentation on an article. And we had staff members here, but I will say that hearing from a staff member sometimes clicks in my head, oh, I really wanted to ask about that, or reminds me of something that I've seen here, because you can kind of get lost in the numbers when you don't have that human, we're talking about it, right? Specific stuff. So that's my first question. Are we going to have some of that?
Yeah, if the committee wants that, the administrators have been asking, what do we think you all wanted? I thought it might come up, so I'm glad you brought it up. Last year or the year before, we found that we did a little less of the schools presenting for a few different reasons. But I like the idea, and I think build it into the schedule for people to have an opportunity to come share some highlights of their school year. The challenging thing when people present is every school is going to live in like all these 9 places in the budget. And so I think that created a lot of confusion, but I'd love to have them come in and share some highlights if that's something the committee would like to hear.
Well, I think it's also important as we're going through these conversations, it's really good to have them sitting here with us. You know, when we had that first initial talk about, you know, some of the stuff that we're looking at, and we're talking about the certifications for students through LRTC, having Rob available here to be able to stand up and answer those questions is really an important piece. I hate to have them have to join us at every evening, but I really think it's really important that our administrators are, you know, when we start talking about ELL, when we start talking, there's a lot of different things that we're going to need to talk about here. And it's really important for them to be here to kind of help guide us through some of the stuff. We like to think that we know a lot about what's going on, but we don't know half of what we need to know. of what's going on. And I really rely on the experts to tell us. Another thing I just want to put out there, we were kind of quiet tonight. We didn't have a lot of questions, and I just want to let the community know that, we're just getting this. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be a million questions next time as we get the chance to look through all of this, really digest it, and start putting together our own sets of questions as we're walking through this whole thing.
Yeah, and I also think that there's been a lot of questions, sometimes directly to me from one person, things like that. So I anticipate a lot more questions, but I know that there's already been a lot that maybe not got pushed out here tonight, and I'm sure there'll be more from the binder. I'm curious from a tweaking of the schedule perspective, how would people feel about moving some things from March 15th, Article 2, Article 3, and some review items up to March 13th with 6, 7, 9, 10? I think it's feasible. And then using the 15th for blocking out sometimes just programmatically principals and directors having an opportunity to come share some highlights and give you an opportunity to ask them any questions you may have. That be okay with people? Yeah, okay. We have other time after, but I guess a piece of me would like for you to hear from them before the city council joint meeting. So we'll do that. I'll tweak that schedule and share that back out publicly so people know. And I know our administrators are more than willing to come share some of their stuff.
Just to follow up, when I look at, and this is just one particular area because I do have sort of a passion for it and a thing with it, but the special education piece, we talk about all of those things, and 90% approximately were unfilled positions. I really want to hear from our special education director, especially with some of the changes she made last year. How is that affecting her that we still have 90% of that staff not filled? Where are we at with the student ratio to staff, especially with those kids with the most special needs? I think those are important things that we have to hear as we're going through this process. But, I also want to bring up also that, and I don't want to sound like the person that's harping on this, but I'm going to harp a little bit. It's really important that we understand what the SEL, what all of these, the RTIs, what all of these different people are doing and how effectual that is for our students moving forward. One of the things I hear every year, and I've been doing this for a little bit of time, is that, people look at the bottom line. So they're going to look at our budget, and they're going to look at the budget for fiscal year 19 through 20, and they're going to see what we asked for. And then they're going to look at fiscal year 23 to 24, and they're going to see that. And we're going to see a $20 million difference from those 4 years, right? And I know there's a lot of detail in that, but I'm just putting this out there. People will say, well, how has our graduation rate changed in those 4 years if we're still up $20 million now from what we were 4 years ago? I'm just putting out there what I know people in our community ask about. And we need to be prepared for those kind of questions and to be able to have those conversations.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I would reiterate that 70% of our budget is staff. And so increase in salaries and in insurance are 70% of that factor. And that's a whole lot of it. The SEL positions, happy to talk about them and some of the work that they're doing. SEL positions are not in this budget. We've used some ESSER dollars to support those. I do think there's a story to tell with that, though. I didn't intend to do this, but I want to pull something up and share with you if I could. Bear with me here just a second. I want to share a picture with you. I don't believe this has anything on it that's identifiable. So this picture that I'm sharing on the screen right now, I'm only gonna leave it up for a second because I don't want anything to be identifiable. You can see all those are all little packets of information that I signed off on Monday morning. Every one of them is either a DHHS report or a student at risk report that has formal documentation tied to it. That's how I started my day Monday. And if we don't think we need SEL or supports for our kids to learn coping strategies and how to navigate family situations at home, we are on the wrong page. And I'll advocate for it. Ultimately, I don't get a vote at different levels, but the level of need when it comes to students and how they hurt Everything from equity to social skills, to coping strategies, to trying to be their best self. Our kids are hurting right now coming out of this pandemic. We cannot ignore that. We will see more students in terrible situations, incarceration, death. We're already seeing it. It's active in our community, and I'll support every minute, and I may lose, but I will support every single minute with evidence of how it's changing kids' lives and the number of kids that we're missing that are involved in crime, drugs, to fight their own mental health. Mental health is created by a lack of supports and the ability to deal with things at a very young age. And so I do think we need to tell the SEL story, because it may be a buzzword for some, but it's changing some kids' lives. And otherwise, it will cost our community millions of dollars later in the wrong ways if we don't do something now.
And that's why I want to have that conversation, because we need our community to understand what this is, what this does, and what the need is. Ugh, I don't really want to talk about this, but we lost another one this week. Monday, a 24-year-old. We have, it's not just the littles that are struggling. It is everywhere. And we have to talk about this. We really do. We have drug overdoses happening. We have young people taking their own lives. This is not okay. And so I just, when I use the word harp, again, it's not to be the devil's, sometimes I have to play devil's advocate and I have to push that out there, but we have to talk about these things. Sometimes we don't want to talk about some of the hard stuff, but it's really important that our community understands, and they don't just go for the buzzwords or the social media stuff that's just thrown out there without understanding the facts and understanding the needs and understanding everything from a full perspective. So that's where I'm at with all of that. So thank you.
And I appreciate you asking, because I think, well, all of you, the questions you're asking, every nugget of information has a background and a backdrop. And I don't want to just sit here and tell all of it. People get bored of my voice already, right, Garrett? But I just, there's some areas, as you all know, I'm pretty passionate about. But when we look in a mirror at home and we think about our own children being in harm's way or hurting, imagine the reaction you get at your own home. And if home doesn't have that resource or that support, and we're talking about kids coming in to access their learning, we have to build a bridge to that. We just have to. Because our kids are hurting. Not just a certain demographic of kids, all our kids are coming out of this pandemic. I talk to students as much as I can. As you know, I have 2 students at home. There's some things that are going on for people that are very real and things that people would never expect. And so those skills of labeling, identifying how someone feels and what to do with that, what the resources are, or just feeling better on your own because you know how to at least take that step, or how to have a healthy conversation in a challenging way, or a challenging conversation in a healthy way, I should say. If we can graduate kids with that ability and that they're lifetime learners, that's a win. And so I don't think we can give up on that effort. So I appreciate you asking.
I want to point out that we have a city councilor here tonight, and it is a very rare thing that we have a city councilor join us, other than the city council representative that's on the school committee. And I would encourage everybody, all of our city councilors, to join. I think it's really important. And thank you, Councilor Pease, for being here and listening to all of this. I really appreciate it.
Ms. Hurd.
Thank you. I was looking forward to like our next session, and I don't know where this falls, but we talked briefly about this earlier in the week. What our vans are used for, how they're used, are they paid off, what the insurance costs. I don't know what article that falls under. Would it be cheaper for staff members to charge mileage? Like, how does that all break down and like where that goes? So I didn't know if that was a future thing, if that's something that could be like worked on for the next one, or if that's an article we've already talked about. I don't know technically.
So I think specific to like the vans that we have, I think we can put something together for you and bring that back. Couple little nuances, staff driving students from an insurance perspective is a no-no. I've given some like superintendent permissions here and there for very rare, unique situations. I think twice in my multiple years now, but we don't put kids in our own vehicles for lots of reasons. Yeah, for lots of reasons. And not just accidents, I think it's a protection for staff too, and also for kids. The vehicles themselves, we used emergency funds to buy them when we were moving computers to kids' houses and giving up MiFis and dropping off work and picking up work, things like that. So there's always a cost, but there's no ongoing payment for those. Those are actually purchased. There's a maintenance schedule working with the technical center on, and also with the city garage. But you still have wear and tear, fuel use, maintenance that will come up, as the years go on. But we can certainly get you more detail. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, Adam, like what the insurance is for those, because we're part of the municipal insurance.
I can try to break that piece out. Doesn't come necessarily broken down that way, but I can try to figure it.
Okay. So we'll bring back some more information on that. Certainly there's a cost, and I think as the vehicles age, there could be additional cost. Or unless we come up with a different plan. Other ways we use the vans, just so you know, actually been communicating with the Y. They have a summer swim program. Obviously, because we've lost students to swim and water related incidents. We're a big supporter of the swimming piece, and last year they had secured some, or were working on securing some grant funding. I don't want to speak for Gary, but secured some grant funding to purchase vehicles to help bring kids to different sites. They haven't come in yet. They did get the funding, but they're not in yet. So last summer they used a couple of our vans. They took good care of them. They brought them to and from, and paid for the fuel and whatnot. And they've asked recently to do that again, and we've agreed. And so we're working out those details. So it's not just constrained to Lewiston Public Schools and kind of sitting there all summer. They are used for other things. So there's a benefit. I will say though, from a budget perspective, looking out 4 or 5 years when these vans start to pop up with additional issues, I don't see us trying to maintain that fleet as something long-term. So it will be hard to lose some of those things, but I think COVID gave us the ability to purchase some things that were incredibly useful in the moment, incredibly convenient to have, but in the long run, to maintain a fleet of those vans is probably not something that we're going to financially try to do. We may even look to sell them at some point when they've reached the end of their useful life to us, if they require a lot of maintenance or safety concerns for kids. So.
Anyone else? You want to just hit the highlight for the next meeting? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so next meeting, from the slides, we have right now we've scheduled 6, 8, and 9. So 6, 8, 9, and 10 for our next meeting. I may try to move a few things into that, but we'll share it on the agenda. I love the idea of bringing back our administrators to share some bright spots and do some Q&A. I think that would be good. That's all I have for tonight.
If there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Is heard.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting, please.
We have a second.
Second.
We have a second by Ms. Whitlow. Any discussion? All in favor? We are adjourned.